Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hope your Friday is going well, and we're trying to get back to our morning schedule here. So, when we come back, a little more about that NATO clown show in Washington, D.C.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need to resolve to resist.
Yes, please like this show, hit that like button, subscribe if you can. We need to build those subscribers. We're approaching 30,000, little ways away, but I know we can do that. Perhaps in a month. We've done it before. We can do it again. Thank you for your support, regardless. And we beat Trudeau's censorship and we beat YouTube suppression every time you guys like this station. And that's what we need to do because stations like this are being suppressed by YouTube. If you don't believe me, just look at what's being recommended. And actually, have a look at the advertisements sometime and what they're running here to discourage people from watching real small c conservative news. So we're fighting back. I think that's the important thing. Couple of comments on yesterday's show. I'm so glad so many of you watched it, and it's still building in the numbers. My interview with People's Party of Canada leader Maxime Bernier, who is an old friend from the days when he was a cabinet minister in the government of Prime Minister Stephen Harper. He was a foreign affairs minister and the industry minister. And of course, ran unsuccessfully in 2017 for the leadership of the Conservative Party against Andrew Scheer. I always thought there was something funny going on in that vote because it was all about the dairy producers essentially making sure Scheer won. Won't go into that now. But a lot of people, no, I won't say a lot. Some people question why I should be talking to the People's Party of Canada leader. Am I a member? I don't belong to any political party. I support small c conservative and small l libertarian ideas, policies in Canadian politics. If the Conservative Party of Canada is nailing those policies, I support what they're doing. I support what the People's Party of Canada says, and I think Maxime is probably the most forthright political leader in Canada, and I will always have him on my show. He's always welcome to talk about these things. And I don't tell people how to vote, and I don't tell people who to support. I know most of my viewers, I'm sure 99 to 100% of my viewers are not going to support the new Democratic Party, the Liberal Party, or the Green Party. And that's just natural politics. But I say that at the beginning just to explain, what I'm doing here. My job as a journalist is to push politicians farther away from the leftist woke policies, farther, if you will, to the center right. The center right. We need to do that. That's what journalists should be doing if they're small c conservatives. We need to push the agenda. And we have to report on the stories the mainstream media is not talking about. And that includes issues like gender ideology, euthanasia. These are issues the mainstream media wants to ignore. And these are the issues that this station will not ever ignore. So let's get on to the real news here, because I think there's some fascinating stuff going on here. The NATO summit. I've said so much about that. And I just want to say, first of all, if you've not had a chance to read my article on Substack, on KRAYDEN'S Right Substack, it's all about how the merchants of death won the Cold War. And it's an argument that NATO has become irrelevant. Now, there's a Human Events article coming up today about the same subject. I encourage you to read it. I have written this, I think, with some, shall we say, fear that it's going to make me look as something I'm not. I'm not a pacifist. I'm not a peacenik. But I do think NATO is not the organization Canada or the United States should be belonging to right now. It is counterproductive to world peace and security. Having 32 members does not make an organization stronger, when it's a collective security organization. When you have that many members, the chance of war increases, and so it becomes a case of collective suicide, not collective security. When a club keeps admitting just about anybody, it ceases to be a club of integrity anymore. So we'll get back to Trudeau's performance at the NATO summit this week in Washington. Absolute bravado, as usual. Not bravura. You'll never see brilliance from Trudeau, but you'll see boasting. And he had the audacity to suggest, yeah, we're going to hit that 2% of the GDP spending mark by 2032. Now, I've said it all week. You can't plan defense spending a decade in advance because you're not going to be there to implement the policy. It's going to be a different government. Hopefully, Justin Trudeau will not be here in 8 years, and the Liberal government most likely will not be in power in 8 years. There'll be a different government with different priorities, different spending. Not saying defense. Not at all. There's no guarantee of that. So if you're really serious about spending 2% of the GDP on national defense, do it now or next year. And Trudeau needs to invest, and that's the only time I'm going to use government spending is and invest in the same phrase, in the same sentence. Trudeau does need to spend more in the military because he's ruined it. He has sent all of our equipment over to Ukraine to be demolished. He has completely eradicated our supply of ammunition, and he has made the military a woke and useless force to a large degree. It cannot function as a military. It cannot function on an operational basis anymore. That's the real problem with the military, that it's woke. It's been destroyed from the inside. Yes, it needs some more money, but if that money is spent on diversity programs, if that money is spent on making our soldiers, sailors, and airmen more progressive, more leftist, then it's money wasted. It needs to be spent on real equipment that works, and it needs to be spent on the self-defense of Canada, defending Canada, not sending money in billions of dollars to Ukraine or to an organization called NATO, which is passé, irrelevant, a figment of the past. So that's what Trudeau did. That's his response to the large and massive calls from many United States senators and congressmen that Canada needs to pull its own weight. Well, we'll do it in 8 years, Trudeau says. What balderdash, and you know it is. You know it's absolute balderdash. So what else happens at the NATO summit? And I'll get to Joe Biden in a minute. He stole the show for idiocy, wokeness, and sheer mendacity. Trudeau lied through his teeth throughout this conference. But Joe Biden did too. Joe Biden is completely delusional about his record as president and about his chances of winning a second term against Donald Trump. Totally delusional. But here's another aspect of this NATO conference. Trudeau took the opportunity to talk about Chrystia Freeland's future. Trudeau says his full confidence in Freeland following reports of tension between Prime Minister's office, the PMO, and Minister. Now, I'm going to get to a brief clip here. Now, this is absolutely fascinating because Trudeau is asked, if Freeland's job as finance minister is secure, is he going to bring in Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, in to replace Freeland as the next finance minister? Oh, Trudeau wouldn't address that one directly. He is lying through his teeth, but he's very careful. He parses his words, and Trudeau is not very good at being subtle. He's not very good at being intelligent in his spoken responses if he has no script in front of him. But he actually gets through this question without really answering it. And by saying, hey, Chrystia Freeland will always have a role to play. It might be as a janitor, but yeah, it'll be an important role. It's very important to keep those floors clean, isn't it? Well, let's get to that clip here.
your staff discuss the possibility of replacing Chrystia Freeland as Finance Minister with Mark Carney? And did you raise this issue with Mr. Carney personally? En français aussi.
I have been talking with Mark Carney for years now about getting him to join federal politics. I think he would be an outstanding addition at a time when Canadians need good people to step up in politics. In regards to Chrystia, she has been a close friend and ally and partner in doing really big things for Canada and will continue to be. Delivering the largest housing and most ambitious housing program in Canada's history, delivering on childcare, transforming our economy to be ready for the 21st century. These are all things that Chrystia has led on and will continue to. I have full confidence in her abilities and on the work we're going to be doing together.
Okay, once again, he did not answer the question. Will she remain as finance minister? Didn't say so. He has full confidence in her abilities. What, to clean the floor? Oh, maybe she'll just be looking after housing. Maybe she'll be given a special portfolio for housing. Or maybe she'll become the next housing minister. Do you hear cabinet shuffle coming up? Yes, that's exactly what's happening, because Trudeau will always change the window dressing when his leadership is under threat. Will he bring Mark Carney in? Does Mark Carney even want to come in? I don't know. But Mark Carney could say, hey, this is my chance to get inside the tent and get my knife ready for Trudeau when the time comes. And finance minister job? Maybe I want that. It's entirely possible. I have seen this in the past so many times with the Liberal Party. And generally, the leader thinks he's putting one over on his caucus, on his cabinet, and on the public. But they're not, because they are delusional. And Trudeau is delusional. He thinks he's still in control. He thinks destiny is still on his side. He thinks history is still on his side. And he's going to win this internal leadership war. And he's going to fool Mark Carney. No, he's not going to fool Mark Carney. Mark Carney is going to, if Mark Carney accepts the invitation to be finance minister and Chrystia Freeland is out, Carney will work day and night to replace Justin Trudeau. But as I've said in the past, and I'll say it again, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. What's the real issue here in terms of Justin Trudeau's character? The way Justin Trudeau treats female ministers and female MPs. This is fascinating because you know Justin Trudeau loves to tell you that he's a feminist. And everybody else, all of his critics are misogynistic. He said everybody in the Freedom Convoy was misogynistic. Everybody, even the women. But he labeled them all as racist and misogynistic. And of course, who's the racist? Who's the guy who did blackface for decades? Who did blackface so many times he can't recall how many times? And who's the guy that treats women in his cabinet and in his caucus like dirt? Well, there he is at the NATO summit saying how much he loves Chrystia Freeland, how close he is to Chrystia Freeland. And I'm no fan of Chrystia Freeland. I've made that quite clear if you watch Daily Question Period. She is grating on the nerves. She comes across scornful, hectoring, lecturing, like a obnoxious, arrogant schoolmarm. But when you see her being put to this kind of performance by Trudeau, it is just, at times, you have a twinge of sympathy for her. And it recalls another time. Remember this? This is a famous picture, actually, of Trudeau embracing Jody Wilson-Raybould, who, of course, was the first Indigenous Justice Minister and Attorney General of Canada. But Jody Wilson-Raybould was expendable, just like Chrystia Freeland is. And, it sounds so Stalinist. Stalin got rid of all the old Bolsheviks. He got rid of all the people who built the Bolshevik Party, who helped him seize power, because they were expendable. Once you do your job for Justin Trudeau, you're expendable. You're out, especially if you're a woman. Because Trudeau has nothing but scorn and contempt for women. He's a complete hypocrite. This is the guy who claims he's a ardent feminist, and he's out there to support women's rights, and he really believes in the cause. Of course, it's all nonsense. He threw Jody Wilson-Raybould under the bus during the SNC, or the aftermath of the SNC-Lavalin scandal, to his neck in that scandal, in terms of ensuring that SNC-Lavalin wasn't subject to any judicial review. Jody Wilson-Raybould objected to that. She thought that smelt deeply of corruption, and she spoke out about it. She was gone. You recall that. Here's something you probably don't remember as well. This is not only a woman MP, but a black woman MP from Southern Ontario. This is Selena Cesar Chavanes. She talked about how she had to deal with this huge harangue from Trudeau when she announced that she might not be running again in the next election. Trudeau treated her like dirt. I thought he was all for women, especially women of color. No, that's once again, it shows Trudeau's true colors himself. And that is hypocrisy. And that is narcissism. And he thinks he can get away with whatever he chooses to get away with. So this is a man who lies perpetually, who denies reality chronically, who cannot see the truth in front of his face, and who has the audacity to project his own, shall we say, discrimination, shall we say, his own prejudices on other people, especially his political opponents. They're the racists, they're the misogynists, and sometimes they're even Nazis. So that's what Justin Trudeau is up to here. And I find it absolutely fascinating. But even Justin Trudeau couldn't be the chief clown at this NATO summit, where they're all walking around talking like dead people about an organization that is on the verge of collapse. Turkey will be leaving NATO within the next, I would predict, 6 weeks. Hungary will be leaving NATO, and that will begin a mass exodus of member states from NATO, especially as it becomes clear that NATO is only about fomenting war with Russia right now. And it is a destabilizer on the security of the world. It is not, as it did throughout the Cold War, it is not doing that mission and that objective and that role responsibly anymore. It's not preserving peace and security in Europe or the world. It is creating chaos. It's creating the conditions, the environment that is ripe for a third world war, a nuclear war with Russia. That is exactly what NATO is doing. And for them to go on all week at this delusionary Washington summit to talk about how Ukraine is going to be a member of NATO sooner or later, it's inevitable, that is nothing but a load of trash. That is rubbish. Ukraine will not be a member of NATO. It cannot be a member of NATO. And NATO knows that. But they're playing a game. They're playing a political game, and they think you're not going to notice. Because all they're doing is trying to survive. They're desperate to survive, to keep their jobs, to keep their positions, to keep this anachronistic organization alive today. That's all this is about. So Joe Biden went even further than Justin Trudeau in terms of being the NATO clown. And here's evidence of that.
Future has hung over the NATO summit a little bit this week. Speaker Pelosi made a point of suggesting that your decision on whether to stay in the race was still open. George Clooney and a handful of lawmakers have called on you to step aside. Reuters is reporting tonight that UAW leadership is concerned about your ability to win.
UAW just endorsed me, but go ahead.
Thank you. My question for you is, how are you incorporating these developments into your decision to stay? And separately, what concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president until I think she was not qualified to be president.
He wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump. Yeah, he's certainly exhibiting those motor skills very well, and those verbal skills. He cannot seem to get it right at any time.
So let's start there. number one. The fact is that the consideration is that I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again. Secondly, the idea, I served in the Senate a long time. The idea that senators and congressmen running for office worry about the ticket is not unusual. And I might add, there are at least 5 presidents running or incumbent presidents who had lower numbers than I have now, later in the campaign. So there's a long way to go in this campaign. And so
Sure sign of dementia and Parkinson's is whispering like that, bringing his voice down.
So I'm just going to keep moving. And because, look, I got more work to do. We've got more work to finish. There's so much, we've made so much progress. Think about it. Think about where we are economically relative to the rest of the world.
Yeah, think about it. Think about how much money you spent, inflationary spending. Think about that infrastructure bill that did nothing for infrastructure, but just fed Democratic pet projects. Think about that. Think about the disaster you made of everything you touched. But most of all, and I'll touch on this later, think about the open border you created and sustained, and how many tens of millions of illegals you let in the country. Your record is a disaster as much as your current mental state is a disaster. You have nothing to run on, Joe Biden.
Name me a world leader who wouldn't want to trade places with our economy. We've created over 800,000 manufacturing jobs, 1.5 million jobs. I mean, so things are moving. We got more to go. Working class people still need help. Corporate greed is still at large. Their prices, the corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. They're coming down, and so I'm optimistic about where things are going. Danny Kemp, AFP.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask you about your, you mixed up Presidents Zelensky and Putin earlier today. And you now have sort of your key allies, including the British Prime Minister, the President of France, and the German Chancellor having to step in and make excuses for you on that. And officials here are saying off the record that your decline has become noticeable. Hasn't this now, frankly, become damaging for America's standing in the world? Thank you.
Did you see any damage to our standing in my leading this conference? Have you seen a more successful conference? What do you think? And the Putin piece, I was talking about Putin, and I said, and now, at the very end, I said, here, I mean, Putin, I said, no, I'm sorry, Zelensky.
Everything Joe Biden done is the best, the biggest, the most fantastic, the most successful. This is a man who is clearly ego-driven to the point that he is willing to look like a fool before the public because he wants to retain the presidency at any cost. He doesn't care how stupid he looks. He doesn't care how moronic he looks because he thinks it doesn't really matter because he's such a great leader. And let's watch a little more of this one here. I won't put the entire segment on, but here's a few more gaps.
Or did he break it? On the last day of the NATO summit, a mortifying gaffe.
Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. You're going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky.
But lucky for President Biden, he had one opportunity to help us forget his terrible faux pas. Here's how that went.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president.
We're pretty sure he meant his actual VP, Kamala Harris.
Right now, Donald Trump is using that to mock your age and your memory. How you combat that criticism from tonight?
The president spent the rest of his time fending off the media feeding frenzy.
Your decline has become noticeable.
It is not your enemies who are calling on you to reconsider your decision. It's your friends.
They're worried about the next bad night and the bad night after that.
Would you reconsider your decision to stay in the race?
No, unless they came back and said, there's no way you can win. No one's saying that.
Actually, everybody's saying that. And that's what Joe Biden isn't getting, or he's not capable of understanding, is just his cognitive ability has sunk that low. I don't know how much he understands. I don't know how much he was pumped up on drugs last night just to get through. This news conference was 2 hours late. By the time they finally dragged him up to the stage, they kept putting it off, putting it off. You know, they were debating behind the scenes. Can we get away with it one more time? Is he pumped up enough with drugs so that he can appear at least a little bit understandable, comprehensible? Well, it wasn't a complete catastrophe. It wasn't complete, but it once again indicates that he's barely skating on thin ice, that he's always on the verge of disaster, that he just can't make it for another 4 years. I don't have to convince you of that. But it's amazing to me that the U.S. media took 4 years to understand how bad this guy is. He ran the last campaign from a bunker, from his basement in his Delaware home. He refused to come out except for planned interviews that were scripted. He did a few, what did they call them, drive-in rallies in fields where there were sometimes like 30 to 100 people at these rallies. That's all he did. And there was dozens of incidents caught on film with Joe Biden being unable to distinguish fact from fantasy, from reality from fiction. He didn't know who was in the audience at certain events. He thought people who were dead or long not operating in politics were there. He waved and said hello to people who were not in the audience. He had trouble walking off podiums consistently. He couldn't climb the stairs to Air Force One. He was constantly unable to clarify his positions or to define his policies. It was embarrassing. And now the mainstream media is suddenly saying, oh, yeah, there seems to be a problem. Is he going to do it again? Of course he'll do it again. He's been consistently doing it now for 4 years, if not longer. And it's going to get worse. But the point is, I'll leave it with this. Like Justin Trudeau, Joe Biden is a chronic liar. He cannot tell the truth. And for Biden to suggest for a minute that he has a good record to run on, it's not just about his mental acuity right now. It's about those last 4 years that he did so brilliantly, that he ran the government so well. All he has to do is run on that record. His record is abysmal. If the only part of his record you want to emphasize is the open border, he is the worst president in American history. He has allowed in 45 million illegals. And now he's talking about, we got that problem solved. No, you haven't got anything solved. You are responsible for allowing in 45 million illegals and moving them around the country at taxpayer expense. That is a fact. That's not Republican talking points. That's not Republican propaganda. These are facts that have been long established. This is what the Biden administration has been all about. And what about those children? 600,000 children lost in the United States to trafficking. I can't say what kind of trafficking because I'll probably be punished for doing so. But you know what I'm talking about. Biden is responsible for that as well. That is a tragedy. That is a crime. This man should not be rewarded with another 4 years as president. And the fact that anyone would even consider him able to function for another 4 years as president is insane. And they're as delusional as Joe Biden is. So he needs to get out of this race. Although, if he stays in the race, it'll be the best thing Donald Trump could possibly ask for and the worst thing the Democrats could possibly hope for. But do you think Kamala Harris is any better? This is a woman who can't put a sentence together either, who repeats the same phrases constantly. So I don't think that's really an option either, do you? Anyway, I've been on here for 30 minutes now. Thanks for watching. I will be back tomorrow. And I'll say it again. It's tough for me to say NATO needs to pass into the mists of time, of history. because I worked for NATO in the Canadian Armed Forces. I was deployed to Bosnia. I wrote the propaganda. I wrote the talking points. But I can't believe him anymore. And I think they're a part and a thing of the past. And we need to wake up to what's happening today. The Cold War has been over for 30 years. Biden seemed to recognize that last night. He said, hey, the Cold War is over. Yeah, guess what, pal? It's been over for over 3 decades. And it's time to move in a different direction. But Biden's incapable of doing that. Hopefully, Donald Trump will be, although I'm never entirely certain where he stands on NATO. I think we need to move on, though. Thanks for watching, everybody. And we will be back tomorrow. I just want to get a few more of your comments up here before I leave you. Please support this station as much as you can. Please tell your family and friends to watch this broadcast. I think we're doing an important job.